My partner tried to shut me out. I showed the board the one flaw he never saw coming. My partner called me obsolete. A relic. He thought his algorithms and investor money could replace my 40 years of experience. He and his billionaire backer planned to take my company, my name, and toss me out with the trash. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot that while they were learning to code, I was learning how things fall down. And when they handed me the termination papers, I handed them back the one thing that could send them to prison. My name is Mark Chen. I'm 55 years old, and this is how you fight back when they think you're finished. I was sitting in my corner office on the 14th floor of the building I designed 23 years ago, watching the morning sun paint geometric patterns across my drafting table. That table is an antique now, a relic from 1987 when I founded Chen Associates with nothing but a protractor, a dream, and an unshakable belief in the fundamental laws of physics. At 55, the gray at my temples has spread like frost, and my hands, these steady hands that drafted thousands of blueprints, now tremble slightly when I'm tired. But my mind remains sharp, honed by decades of catching the mistakes that could kill people. The knock on my door was perfunctory, barely a courtesy. "Mark, we need to talk." Julian strode in without waiting for an answer, his Italian loafers clicking against the hardwood floor. At 34, Julian was everything I wasn't, sharp-suited, Harvard-educated, fluent in the language of venture capital and algorithmic modeling. He joined my firm 8 years ago as a junior partner, bringing with him a Rolodex of tech clients and a software suite that promised to revolutionize structural engineering. I'd been grateful then. Foolishly grateful. "Morning, Julian." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, but he remained standing, arms crossed, radiating impatience. "I'll make this quick. Robert Cray is coming by at 11. I need you to be diplomatic." Robert Cray. The name alone made my jaw tighten. The venture capitalist had been circling my firm for 6 months, ever since Julian brought him in as a strategic advisor for the Axiom Tower project, our most ambitious undertaking to date, a 60-story glass monument to modern engineering that would reshape the city's skyline. Diplomatic about what exactly? I asked, though I already sensed the answer in the careful neutrality of Julian's expression, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. The firm's direction. Our methodology. The board thinks we need to modernize our approach, and Robert has some ideas about restructuring that could take us to the next level. Restructuring. I let the word hang in the air between us like smoke from a distant fire. You mean pushing me out? Julian had the decency to look uncomfortable for exactly 2 seconds before his expression hardened into something I didn't recognize. "Nobody's pushing anyone out, Mark. But we need to face facts. Your methods are from another era. We're competing with firms that can model an entire building in virtual reality before breaking ground. We're using software that runs 1,000 structural simulations in the time it takes you to sharpen a pencil. Meanwhile, you're still hunched over graph paper like it's 1985, double-checking calculations that have already been verified by systems designed by MIT engineers." My gaze drifted to the shelf behind my desk, where 43 leather-bound notebooks sat in chronological order, each one filled with my handwritten calculations for every major project the firm had ever completed. My verification notebooks, I call them. Julian calls them my security blanket. The younger engineers whisper about them in the break room, I know, treating them like some quirky obsession of the old man who can't adapt to the modern world. "Software is only as good as the data you feed it," I said quietly. "And simulations only test the scenarios you program them to test." That's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding us back. Julian checked his Rolex, a gift from Robert Cray, I'd noticed, and moved toward the door. "Look, just hear Robert out. For the good of the firm. For your legacy." After Julian left, I sat motionless for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the darkened computer screen. The face that looked back seemed older than it had yesterday, the lines deeper, the eyes more tired. Obsolete. That's what Julian thought. What they all thought. The dinosaur who didn't know the asteroid had already hit. I pulled notebook number 43 from a shelf, the Axiom Tower project, and began to read, my finger tracing the familiar loops and angles of my own handwriting, each calculation a conversation with the fundamental forces that held buildings upright or let them fall. The conference room at 11 o'clock felt like an ambush. Robert Cray sat at the head of the table, my position, flanked by Julian and 3 members of the board, Patricia Wong, David Eisenberg, and Marcus Hill. All of them I'd handpicked when the firm expanded, trusted colleagues who'd worked alongside me for years, who'd celebrated birthdays and promotions and the birth of my granddaughter. Now they couldn't meet my eyes, their gazes fixed on the polished mahogany table, as if it held the secrets of the universe. Mark, thank you for joining us. Cray's smile was all teeth, no warmth, the practiced expression of someone who'd spent years convincing people to do things against their own interests. He was 42, silver-haired despite his relative youth, dressed in the casual uniform of Silicon Valley money, expensive jeans, tailored blazer, no tie. I'll get straight to the point. Julian and I have been reviewing the firm's performance metrics, and we see tremendous potential for growth. But we need to move fast, and we need to move decisively. I remained silent, waiting. Years on construction sites had taught me that silence made people nervous, made them reveal more than they intended. The Axiom Tower is already attracting international attention, Cray continued, leaning back with the confidence of someone who'd already won. We've had inquiries from Dubai, Singapore, Shanghai. But to scale up and capture that market, we need to streamline operations, cut inefficiencies, embrace full automation. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. What we don't need is methodology that belongs in a museum. What Robert means, Patricia interjected, her voice apologetic, almost pleading, is that we need to demonstrate to potential clients that we're using cutting-edge technology. Your verification process, Mark, the manual calculations, they add weeks to every project timeline. In today's market, that's a competitive disadvantage we can't afford. They also ensure our buildings don't fall down, I replied evenly, keeping the anger churning in my gut out of my voice. Julian laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the room. When was the last time a modern structural engineering firm had a catastrophic failure due to computer modeling? Our software has been validated by MIT, Stanford, and the National Institute of Standards. It's used by 90% of top-tier firms worldwide. Your insistence on double-checking everything by hand isn't due diligence, Mark. It's paranoia. It's ego. It's you refusing to admit that maybe, just maybe, you're not the smartest person in the room anymore. The words landed like physical blows, designed to wound, to provoke. I felt something cold settle in my chest. The same sensation I'd felt once on a construction site when a scaffold gave way beneath me, that split-second awareness that the world had shifted, that survival required absolute clarity. Is that what you think? I opened my leather portfolio with deliberate slowness and withdrew a single sheet of paper. Then explain this. I slid the paper across the table, a printout of an internal email I'd accidentally been copied on 3 weeks ago, before Julian had systematically locked me out of most communication chains. The email was from Julian to Cray, sent at 2 in the morning. Mark's review process is adding 6 weeks to every project timeline. If we're going to move forward with the IPO strategy, we need him in an advisory role only. Preferably non-operational. Preferably gone. The room went silent. I watched the color drain from Patricia's face, saw David's hand move unconsciously to his mouth, witnessed Marcus shift in his chair, as if trying to physically distance himself from what was happening. That was taken out of context, Julian said quickly, but his voice had lost its certainty. Was it? I looked around the table, meeting each person's gaze in turn, forcing them to confront what they'd been part of. How long have you all been planning this? Weeks? Months? Did you discuss it over drinks after work while I was at home with my granddaughter, building her a dollhouse because I'm too old-fashioned to just buy one from a store? Cray didn't flinch, and I had to admire the man's composure even as I hated everything he represented. Mark, you built something extraordinary. You should be proud. But every founder reaches a point where they have to decide, do they want to be the person who started something great or the person who held it back from achieving its full potential? He slid a leather folder across the table. We're offering you a very generous package. Advisory role with full pension, medical benefits that'll cover you and your family for life, and your name stays on the building. You get to preserve your legacy without standing in the way of progress. That's more than fair. And if I refuse, then we call a vote. Cray nodded to the board members. Julian holds 30% of the firm now, thanks to the shares you generously gave him over the years. I've acquired another 25% from various stakeholders. Between us, we control 55%. We have the majority needed to restructure your role with or without your cooperation. This meeting, Mark, is a courtesy. We're giving you the chance to leave with dignity intact, reputation untarnished, bank account comfortable. I felt the floor tilting beneath me, the same vertiginous sensation from that scaffold collapse 30 years ago. I'd caught myself that time, grabbed a steel beam with both hands, pulled myself back from the edge. I needed to grab something now. I needed to find the beam that would hold. I'll need time to review any proposal, I said, carefully buying time, my mind already racing through possibilities, contingencies. Of course. Cray's smile widened. Take the weekend. We'll reconvene Monday morning. 9 o'clock sharp. And Mark. He paused at the door. Don't do anything dramatic. Don't go to the press. Don't try to rally the junior partners. Don't make this ugly. You're better than that. As I stood to leave, Julian called out, Mark, this doesn't have to be adversarial. We're building something bigger than any of us. You should be proud. You should want this. I paused at the door, my hand on the brass handle I'd personally selected when we'd renovated this building 15 years ago. Julian, do you know why I keep those notebooks? Why I verify every calculation by hand even though it takes longer, even though everyone thinks I'm crazy? Because you don't trust computers. No, because I don't trust people. I looked back at the room full of former allies, former friends. Computers only make the mistakes we program into them. But people cut corners when they're under pressure. They get ambitious and convince themselves that some risks are acceptable. They tell themselves that speed matters more than safety, that profit matters more than lives. And then buildings fall down and people die, and everyone acts surprised even though the warning signs were there all along. I opened the door. I'll see you Monday. I didn't go home that Friday evening. I went to my workshop, the converted garage behind the small craftsman house, where I'd raised my daughter Sarah, now married, and living in Oregon with my 6-year-old granddaughter Emma. The workshop smells of sawdust and machine oil, lined with tools organized with the same precision I bring to my engineering work. Every socket wrench has its place, every drill bit its drawer, every measurement instrument calibrated and maintained because precision matters, because sloppiness in small things leads to catastrophe in large ones. On the workbench sat my current project, an elaborate 3-story Victorian dollhouse for Emma's birthday next month, complete with working windows, a wraparound porch with turned spindles I'd crafted on my lathe, and a structural frame that could support 50 times its own weight. Over-engineered. Absolutely. But that was the point. That had always been the point. Some things you build to last forever, build to withstand forces you can't predict, build with margins of safety that seem excessive until the day they save lives. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Dad, I tried calling. Are you okay? Julian left me a weird voicemail about transitions and new directions. What's going on? I stared at the message, rage and exhaustion warring in my chest. Julian was already managing the narrative, getting ahead of the story, positioning my removal as a natural evolution rather than a betrayal. Smart. Ruthless. Effective. I didn't text back. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out Notebook 43 and began to read in earnest, cross-referencing with the official Axiom Tower specifications on my laptop. The building was genuinely impressive, 60 stories of glass and steel, anchored by a revolutionary curtain wall system that distributed wind loads through an interconnected web of titanium supports. Julian's star programmer, a brilliant young woman named Vanessa Chen, no relation, though we joke about it when she was hired, had modeled every stress point, every load path, every potential failure mode using software that cost more than my first house. The software said it was perfect. The simulations said it was safe. The board said it was our flagship project that would establish the firm's reputation for a generation. My pencil moved across a fresh sheet of graph paper, reconstructing the calculations from first principles, the way my professors had taught me 40 years ago. Load calculations, wind shear coefficients, thermal expansion rates, material properties. I worked through the night, coffee growing cold in my mug, the dollhouse watching me like a silent witness. At 4 a.m, I found it. The flaw. The fatal error hidden in lines of code and buried under layers of assumptions. The curtain wall system relied on a specific grade of titanium alloy with a tensile strength of 950 megapascals. Standard engineering notation. Metric system. The universal language of structural design. But Vanessa's model had input the value as 950 ksi, kilopounds per square inch, an American unit that hasn't been standard in structural engineering for decades. The difference was catastrophic. The software thought the titanium was 6.895. Times where thousands of pounds of glass break free and fall 60 stories onto crowded sidewalks. where people die because you were too arrogant to double-check the math. Cray barely glanced at it. Mark, we've run thousands of simulations. The software has been validated by the top programs in the world. Your simulations are wrong. I pulled out my verification notebook, opening to pages dense with calculations. The titanium alloy specified has a tensile strength of 950 megapascals. But your model, the model that Chen programmed, uses 950 ksi, kilopounds per square inch, an American unit. The software thinks the material is 6.895 times stronger than it actually is. The calculations are fundamentally flawed. The building will fail in high winds. People will die, and you'll all go to prison for criminal negligence. Julian's face went pale. That's impossible. Vanessa would never make that kind of mistake. You're wrong, Mark. Am I? I slid another document across the table, Vanessa's employment history. Before she came to work for us, she worked for Robert Cray. For 2 full years. As a technical consultant. That's a connection you failed to disclose, Julian. And 3 months ago, right after she input this flawed data, you buried the preliminary safety report that flagged these exact concerns. The same week. Almost like it was coordinated. Cray's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. That's an interesting conspiracy theory, Mark. Very creative. But even if there was an error, which I doubt, it would be a simple mistake. Would it? I pulled out a third document. Because 7 years ago, you were involved in an almost identical project. The Prestige Tower in Seattle. Same curtain wall system, same type of flaw, same catastrophic failure. 4 people died, Robert. And you made millions on the insurance payout because you'd structured the deal so you weren't technically liable. The room exploded. Patricia gasped. David recoiled. Marcus started to speak, stopped, started again. And Julian sat frozen, looking between me and Cray, trying to reconcile the smooth investor he'd trusted with the monster I was describing. That's defamation. Cray stood abruptly, his composure cracking. That project was cleared by multiple firms. The investigation found no criminal wrongdoing. No, but you had a pattern. My voice cut through the chaos. You find projects with problems. You suppress the warnings. You push them to completion despite safety concerns. And when they fail, and they always fail, you profit from insurance claims. The Axiom Tower was supposed to be your next payday, wasn't it? Let it get built with Vanessa's flawed calculations. Let it fail during the first major storm. Swoop in to buy the firm's assets for pennies. Julian was on his feet, his voice shaking. Robert, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't plant Vanessa to sabotage this project. Don't be naive, Julian. Cray's mask slipped entirely. Every major project involves calculated risks. Some risks are necessary for progress. If we stopped every time some old-school engineer got nervous about theoretical scenarios, we never build anything. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a small digital voice recorder on the table. The red light was blinking, recording, capturing every word. The room went absolutely silent, everyone staring at the device. Some risks are necessary for progress, I repeated quietly. That's interesting, Robert. I'm sure the SEC will find it fascinating when they investigate. Along with your admission that you knew about the concerns and suppressed them. Along with your history with the Prestige Tower. Along with evidence that you planted someone inside my firm to sabotage this project. Cray's face went white. You wouldn't dare. It would destroy the firm. Everyone in this room. Would I? I picked up my phone and showed them the screen, an email draft addressed to the SEC, the State Licensing Board, the FBI, and 3 investigative journalists. My finger hovered over send. I've spent 3 days documenting everything. The suppressed report. The calculation error. Vanessa's connection to you. Your history with Prestige Tower. I have enough here to destroy your fund and your career and potentially put you in federal prison. You're insane, Cray whispered. Maybe. But I'm the kind of insane that keeps buildings standing and people alive. What kind are you? Wait. Julian grabbed my arm, desperate. Mark, please. If you send that, the firm will be destroyed. Everything we've built, everything you've built. There has to be another way. There is. I looked at each person in turn. Robert Cray divests completely. Every share, every connection. He leaves and never comes back. Julian, you step down as managing partner. Keep your position, keep your salary, but you don't make strategic decisions anymore. Patricia, David, Marcus, you vote to restore my full authority, and you support immediate retrofitting of the Axiom Tower, regardless of cost. And if we don't? Cray's voice was barely audible. Then I send this email, and we all go down together. You have 60 seconds. The room erupted in frantic, whispered conversations. I sat motionless, my fingers still hovering over send, my face calm despite my thundering heart. I wasn't bluffing. I would burn it all down if that's what it took, because some things mattered more than money, more than reputation, more than 40 years of work. 45 seconds, I said quietly. Cray was calculating, I could see it. Finally, his shoulders sagged. Fine. I'll divest. But this is extortion. I'm exactly better than you, I interrupted. I'm trying to save lives. You're trying to save money. We're not the same. Patricia. She was crying. I'll support the motion to restore your authority. I'm so sorry, Mark. David, Marcus. They both nodded, unable to meet my eyes. Julian. I resign as managing partner. His voice was hollow. Effective immediately. But Mark, I didn't know about Vanessa. I swear I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I believe you, I said, and I was surprised to find it was true. But belief isn't the same as trust. You'll have to earn that back. Cray stood abruptly, snatching his briefcase. You win, old man. But don't think this is over. Robert. I waited until he turned back. In 60 years, nobody will remember your name. But the buildings I designed will still be standing. The people who would have died in your disasters will be alive, raising their own children. That's the only legacy that matters. Now get out of my building. The fallout took 6 weeks. Cray divested at a significant loss, his departure causing ripples throughout the venture capital community. Within a month, the SEC opened a formal investigation. The Prestige Tower case was reopened. Criminal charges were pending. Julian resigned but remained with the firm in a technical capacity. His relationship with Vanessa ended spectacularly when her betrayal was exposed. She disappeared entirely. Some said Canada, others said she'd cut a deal with prosecutors. I didn't care. She was gone. The Axiom Tower was retrofitted based on my calculations. The cost overran by $43 million, the timeline extended by 18 months, but the alternative, potential catastrophic failure and multiple deaths, made the decision easy for everyone except the accountants. When the building finally opened, it was genuinely safe, verifiably sound. The board voted unanimously to restore me as managing partner. I accepted on one condition: every computer model had to be verified by hand by a senior engineer before construction could begin. Some of the younger engineers quit, frustrated. I let them go. Better they work elsewhere than compromise on principles they didn't share. The firm didn't go global. We didn't pursue the massive international contracts Julian had dreamed of. Instead, we became known for something more valuable: absolute, uncompromising reliability. Buildings that would stand for generations because someone had taken the time to check the math. I hired 3 new engineers fresh out of school and trained them personally. I gave each of them a leather notebook on their first day. This, I told them, is where the real work happens. Not on a screen, not in a simulation. Here, where you can see every number, every assumption, every decision. Where you can't hide behind algorithms or blame the software when something goes wrong. This is where you become an engineer. The computer will do the calculations faster than you ever could. But only you can know if those calculations make sense, if they align with reality, if they'll keep people safe. That judgment comes from experience, from checking your work until your hand cramps. It comes from caring more about being right than being fast. On weekends, I returned to my workshop and the Victorian dollhouse. I'd finished it in time for Emma's birthday despite everything, presenting it to her during a video call. Her face filled the screen with pure joy. "Grandpa, how did you make it so perfect?" she'd asked, her small fingers exploring the tiny shingles, the miniature banister, the working door hinges I'd crafted from brass wire. Practice, sweetheart. And patience. And checking my work about 100 times. I'd smiled, feeling the tension finally ease. The most important things always take longer than you think they should. Anything worth building is worth building right. Mom says you're a hero. She says you save lots of people. My throat tightened. I'm not a hero, Emma. I'm just an engineer who did his job. Who refused to cut corners, even when it would have been easier. That's the same thing, Grandpa. Maybe it was. Maybe she understood something most people take a lifetime to learn, that heroism isn't about grand gestures. It's about doing the right thing when the wrong thing is easier, more profitable, more convenient. It's about checking your calculations one more time, even when everyone says you're being paranoid. It's about trusting math over ambition, physics over profit, truth over expediency. 6 months after the confrontation, on a Tuesday, when rain hammered against my office windows, I received a letter from the state licensing board. Cray's engineering fund was under formal investigation for multiple violations spanning 7 years and 4 states. The Prestige Tower case had been reopened with new evidence. Criminal charges for fraud and reckless endangerment were being filed by 3 separate district attorneys. Vanessa Chen had turned state's evidence, her testimony detailing a pattern of deliberate sabotage across multiple projects. Cray's career was over, his reputation destroyed, his wealth consumed by legal fees. I filed the letter away, then returned to my drafting table where a new project awaited, a community center for a historically underserved neighborhood, funded by a modest municipal grant. Nothing flashy, nothing that would win awards. Just a building that would serve its purpose safely for decades. My phone buzzed. A text from Julian. Mark, I know, I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. But I want you to know I'm seeing things differently now. I'm taking a course on structural failures, studying the history you tried to teach me when I was too arrogant to listen. Thank you for stopping me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Thank you for not giving up on the firm. Jay. I stared at the message for a long moment. Finally, I typed back, the foundation was always sound, Julian. We just needed to remember what we built it on. Keep studying. Keep learning. And next time someone tells you to ignore your instincts for the sake of speed or profit, remember the Axiom Tower. Remember what almost happened. M. I set the phone down and picked up my pencil, feeling its familiar weight. Outside my window, the city skyline stretched toward the clouds, dozens of buildings marked with my firm's signature, structures where families lived and worked and dreamed, where the mundane miracle of safety happened invisibly every day because someone had care enough to check the calculations. Not because of flashy technology or cutting-edge software or venture capital funding, but because someone had taken the time to verify the math, to question the assumptions, to trust experience over ambition. Because someone had been willing to be called obsolete, paranoid, outdated, all the words they used to dismiss the people who refused to cut corners. I'm Mark Chen. I'm 55 years old. And I returned to my calculations, my handwriting precise and steady. The pencil moved across the paper in familiar patterns, each line a conversation with forces older than any computer. Gravity, compression, tension, shear. The fundamental laws that governed whether structures stood or fell, whether people lived or died. Obsolete? Perhaps. But standing. Always standing. Built on foundations that can't be programmed or modeled or simulated, only understood through decades of experience, and the humility to know that sometimes the old ways persist because they work, because they've been tested against reality, instead of just theory. And that, I think, as my pencil traces another calculation, another verification, another small act of integrity, in a world that often dismisses such things as inefficient, is the only legacy worth leaving. Not buildings that touch the sky, but buildings that keep people safe. Not innovation for its own sake, but wisdom earned through failure and discipline, and the patient accumulation of knowledge that can't be downloaded or automated or replaced by someone younger and more ambitious. I work into the evening, the rain continuing its steady percussion against the windows, the city lights coming on one by one as darkness falls. My coffee grows cold. My back aches from hunching over the drafting table. My eyes water from strain. But the calculations are right. The math is sound. The building will stand. And somewhere in that simple truth, in that fundamental reliability, I find a peace that no amount of money or recognition or global expansion could ever provide. The peace of knowing I did my job. The peace of knowing that people I'll never meet will live their lives safely because I refuse to compromise. The peace of knowing that obsolete doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes the old ways are the old ways because they work. Because they've survived every test that time and hubris and ambition could throw at them. Because they're built on truth instead of trends, on physics instead of profit, on integrity instead of innovation. I smile to myself, a small private expression of satisfaction, and continue my calculations into the night. Outside my window, the Axiom Tower stands 60 stories tall, its lights glowing against the darkness, its curtain wall system properly reinforced, its foundation sound. A monument not to what might have been, but to what is safe, solid, standing. Just like me. Just like the principles I refused to abandon even when they tried to convince me I was finished, even when they told me my methods belonged in a museum, even when thought algorithms and ambition could replace 40 years of experience and an unshakable commitment to keeping people safe. They called me obsolete. They tried to push me out. They thought they could take everything I'd built and reshape it in their image, faster and flashier and more profitable, cutting corners I'd spent a lifetime learning never to cut. But I showed them something they'd forgotten in their rush toward the future, that the past isn't always a weight holding you back. Sometimes it's a foundation holding you up. That experience isn't just accumulated time. It's accumulated wisdom, accumulated judgment, accumulated understanding of all the ways things can go wrong when you stop checking your work. I showed them that being old doesn't mean being irrelevant. That moving slowly doesn't mean moving backward. That questioning assumptions isn't paranoia. It's the difference between buildings that stand and buildings that fall, between people who live and people who die. I'm Mark Chen. I'm 55 years old. My hands tremble when I'm tired. My back aches after long days at the drafting table, and the younger engineers still whisper about my notebooks like they're relics from another age. But I'm still here. Still checking the calculations. Still refusing to trust software over physics, ambition over safety, profit over principle. Still standing. And that, in the end, is the only thing that matters. Not whether they call you obsolete or outdated or behind the times, but whether you keep standing when they try to knock you down. Whether you keep doing the right thing when the wrong thing would be easier. Whether you remember that some foundations, the ones built on integrity and competence and an unwavering commitment to truth, can't be shaken no matter how hard they push. They thought they could force me out. They thought their money and their algorithms and their carefully planned takeover would be enough. They were wrong. And now, as I sit in my office in the building I designed in the company I founded, surrounded by engineers, I'm training to check their work and question their assumptions and never stop verifying the math. I understand something I couldn't have known when this all started. The real victory wasn't saving the Axiom Tower. It wasn't exposing Cray's corruption or stopping Julian's betrayal or even protecting my firm from destruction. The real victory was proving that in a world obsessed with moving faster, building bigger, and chasing the next innovation, there's still a place for people who move carefully, who build safely, who remember that the most important innovations happened centuries ago when someone figured out how to make structures that don't collapse, how to calculate loads that won't fail, how to design buildings that protect the people inside them instead of threatening their lives. The real victory was showing that wisdom still matters. That experience still counts. That the old ways, the careful ways, the verified ways, the ways that take longer but get it right, still have value in a world that's forgotten how to be patient. I finish my calculations as the rain slows to a drizzle and the city settles into its evening rhythm. I close my notebook, cap my pen, and allow myself a moment of simple satisfaction. Another project verified. Another building that will stand. Another small victory against the forces of carelessness and greed, and the dangerous belief that faster is always better. Tomorrow, I'll start on the next project. I'll pull out another notebook, sharpen another pencil, check another set of calculations that someone else thinks don't need checking. And I'll do it the same way I've done it for 40 years, slowly, carefully, meticulously, with an attention to detail that most people think is excessive until the day it saves their life. Because that's what engineers do. Real engineers. The kind who understand that their work isn't about impressing clients or maximizing profits or building monuments to their own genius. It's about keeping people safe. About checking the math one more time, even when you're tired. About trusting physics over ambition and integrity over innovation. It's about being the kind of obsolete that the world still desperately needs, even if it doesn't always know it. I'm Mark Chen. I'm 55 years old. And this is how you fight back when they think you're finished, not with anger or revenge or bitterness, but with competence, with principle, with the quiet, stubborn refusal to compromise on the things that matter most. They tried to push me out. I showed them the one flaw they never saw coming, their own arrogance, their own willingness to cut corners, their own dangerous belief that technology could replace judgment. And I'm still here, still checking the calculations, still keeping buildings standing and people safe. Still obsolete, still relevant, still necessary, still standing. Please like, comment, and share. If this is your first time watching my video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you'll be notified whenever I post a new story.